I'm Julie Schuster. I'm 18 outside of Orlando. I am currently teaching high school in urban district, in the center school district, Center 58, which is its own kind of small district. And we're I guess I just have to say, we're fully accredited with the station, and we are on the U.S. News and World Report Best High Schools in America list. So I work with very diverse student body, public to count and also specific. And I have a lot of experience teaching with college classes at Rutgers University and in Kansas City, before that, and I'm retired. And I have 4 kids, 2 of which are still in middle school and public school in my district.
David Richner, my wife and I have 4 kids also, a variety of ages and ranges and interests, and then I also have a variety of teaching experiences, including a great deal of math in high school and college, but some other subjects as well.
I'm Nancy Birch. I teach math at a technical school in Chillicothe.
I'm Jen Layton. I'm a parent, and I barely survived high school math. And so I'm just a
And a very important business.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm Tiffany Jones. I teach at the junior high here.
Margaret Lavender from St. Joseph, Missouri, 27 years in the St. Joseph School District, 7 through 12, and also coordinated mathematics K through 12. 7 years at the Northwest RPDC at Northwest Missouri State University, and now adjunct faculty at Northwest in the math department. So I failed retirement twice.
Yes, she's a
Slow learner.
Yeah, some of us just never learn.
Some of us have to keep busy to stay out of trouble. So.
That's true.
With me to stay out of all.
Oh, yeah, that's if you stay off the internet.
I'm Beverly Myers, currently teaching at Jefferson College in the math department. I've been there 24 years, I guess. But I also want to go to teach high school math. Kind of coming full circle because this is the first term I've got high school kids taking online classes with my online students, so that's something interesting and new. We'll see how this goes. I've also taught a lot of different other stuff like physics, science, chemistry, computer classes and stuff like that. So most of what I'm doing right now is on math.
And Rosa, welcome to our group. We're glad you're here today. Thank you, glad you're here. So, now that we've got the introductions and Tiffany's, thank you so much for reminding me that we can do that. I appreciate that. The next thing I think that we talked about, and perhaps maybe we could, the structure we might want to talk about first and next, but the domains of the high school, we never really addressed talking about domains in the high school. Is that all right to move to talking about domains next? Or do you
Do we want to send somebody over there to find out what their schedule is like?
Are they taking a break right now? So I think we can in a few minutes, but yeah, we will definitely do that before we start talking. Absolutely. And keep in mind, if you guys see them out in the hall, that would be a great time for us to take a break and go get some.
It may be time to look at the draft structure for 6, 7, 8. We had to start somewhere.
Okay.
And we just basically have a table with 4 columns. Again, draft as to how they're coded. Each of the sections does have a title, whether we continue to call that domain, big idea.
Right.
I don't know that we've decided on terminology, but again, this is what it looks like. So for grade 6, we started with number, sense, and operations as a title, a heading for one of the 5 sections. As Nancy stated, we did start because she had access to being able to put our current Missouri Learning Standards into the document. And we left, we separated the examples from the standard because there was discussion and we want to change some of those as per our group discussion, so that hasn't all been done. We also had discussed in our group that we wanted definitions, So we've started a column for definitions and clarifications. We also have a column for comments, as we work back and forth. That's kind of where we put our comments. Tiffany said, I have in my notes, we need to. So I went back and included that definition. Or we've added, some of the different standards that we've talked about as a group. So again, it's just coming together, work to be done, but you have to start somewhere. So we started with 4 columns per 5 different headings.
Do you picture the comments column staying, or is that just a working column?
That's a working column.
It really is a working
So it's not
column.
commentary on this?
No, so as it goes to Dropbox and others have comment, then it can.
Okay.
We did this is Nancy, we did discuss that we may think about a section of examples and, not just written like this, but an actual problem that a teacher could use.
Yes, I have a suggestion or possible suggestion you might want to consider. And that is, as I was thinking along these similar lines to what areas where we were looking, and I thought it might be helpful if we had a specific textbooks reference there. So if we took ones that are currently in press or older ones, where we could say, okay, here's a type of problem we're talking about here.
I don't think we would put that in a DESI document that's gonna be published, because then that's them recommending to use a particular company.
No, it's not recommended, it's to get a very specific example.
And I agree, I don't know if we could put that in though and put the reference into a particular book. That's something we would have to know legally if we can do that and what problem. Because I know in the past, when I've been in meetings and they want people to recommend a book, they will do that just because of textbook issues. And one company would be mad because you use one company over another company.
The only reason I mention that is because a lot of the difficulty when I hear comments about the Common Core now is the way in which things are worded and stated. And if we can get away from some of that,
Well, and I think is we need to clarify
if
the
we can
language.
overcome those objections,
Right.
we'll go on a lot towards not only having to really help clarify the standard.
Right, and to clarify what it means and what it says.
Right,
And it could be an example, but I think, Nancy, for middle school, I know all of them there have done a lot of work on writing examples and things of that nature. And probably the people that are actually in the classrooms themselves teaching might be some of the best people to help write some of those things. You rewrite all the time?
We don't have to text, just a set text.
Right, and so that could be something, but I agree with you, Chris, some clarification to do that. Whether we have time for each one of us, for each student to have an example for all of them, may not happen, but I think to have some that we think people might have an issue with, put an example there for example.
And especially when there are other people reviewing the document after it's finished, people in assessment and so on, it would be nice for them to see an example.
Right.
Well, I know from the model curriculum where our hands were really tied as to examples that we could use
Right.
if it was going to be the document even for Missouri. So most of that had to be
Right. And you really can't, teacher
copyright,
created
yes,
it too
very,
bad,
very.
just because of some copyright issues, and also goes back to again, that we're saying, this is a good book, so this is one you should buy, and so you have to be a little bit.
I think that's not the intention.
Yeah, and I know that wasn't your intention at all,
I mean,
but some people interpret these things that way,
Well,
so.
and in the long term, those books may not be available for people to use as a reference anyway.
Right.
It's not right, yeah,
Since we're talking about structure, does it make the most sense to put those examples right next to the standard? Because I think you'd be limited to one example, sort of for space purposes.
Yeah, you don't
Would there
want to
be any
extend.
rationale in having additional examples, or given the example of the problem that you would want them to solve, but showing the solution in an appendix?
Well, I know years ago, with the GLEs, when people were having some issues in elementary school, they went back and wrote examples for each one of the standards with the work that was kind of that they thought kids should be
Right.
doing, and that was a separate document. I don't know, because if we put a lot of examples in this document that we're talking about, a huge document, and you want to keep it small and thin, you guys can add into this so that they can read it, and then if they need clarification. But that would be something this group decides. If we want to put one example here and then other examples.
Right, that's what I was sort of getting,
That was
that's a
even-
structural question.
Well,
Yeah,
even
one
on
here and one
definitions,
here.
if you go to the statistics and probabilities section, when we start to talk about,
How to go down.
yeah, just here down and just,
Is it down?
the definition, the clarification got really lengthy. And so I was even wondering if we wanted, the definitions in the column. But on the other hand, if you have to go look them up, you tend not to. So for ease of reference, but if we take the comment column out and widen that, that'll help a little bit too.
Yeah.
Yes, when we were talking about median and mean absolute deviation, I got a little wordy.
Well, and
That's a
the
really good definition.
other thing is there are some that are out there that Tessie already had a glossary of terms. I don't know if, they had a glossary for K through 6, they had a glossary for different grade levels. I don't know, when we talk about terms, do we want it here right next to it? Or do we want a separate glossary that you could highlight the term, like put it in red or put it in color, so that they could see it was in the glossary? So, and that'll be just a.
I think that's where we're working through it. I think it's good to have this.
As we're working through it, yeah, I agree. For us to look at it, yes.
I
Is this
think,
gonna be an online document that you can just say, I don't remember those definitions, if you didn't know what they were?
I would
That way we can take a look.
and I agree with you when it goes online, but a lot of people, what they want to do is they want to print the whole thing off. So when you get teachers in the classroom, for you and me, yes, but a lot of people want to be able to print off, and maybe just have a separate glossary that you print off, I don't know, but those are all good questions that, and we may not be able to give the final answer of what it is, but we can make recommendations for what we think it should be and how it should be.
Just that takes a lot of visual space in the whole document.
Oh, I agree.
It does.
Right?
It
It's just-
is, as I'm working on it, it is ease to just look at it here and type it in here instead of going, so it is a very nice
Right,
working.
Right.
What about putting a landscape then?
It is.
I think it
Is
is.
it landscape? Okay.
Well,
And I have it blown up so that people
Right.
can read it, so they can see the whole thing, so.
Do you think once you're done working, we can
Right.
have a standard, have the definitions, and then have some examples? I mean, I know this, like you say, is much easier to line up while you're planning and scheming and changing, but once we're done, you may be able to list the standard, and then underneath have definitions, examples, and then go on to the next one.
Right.
For readability, like, I agree right now, work-wise, I think it's easier to go.
Work-wise, it's very much easier to do it, and I think it would be great to get some input from classroom teachers when you get a paper copy of it, or you see it online, what would you prefer? And get some feedback that we'd like it laid out this way, and that it would make it easier for us in classroom, to be able to, because I like what you said there really about hyperlinking, but then instead of classroom, sometimes I hyperlink and get back, if I want to just go look up a quick definition, I absolutely agree with you. But if I want to print off all the terms that my kids are gonna need to know for this 6th grade, maybe I want them all there in one sheet of 30 words or whatever my kids are gonna have to know, I don't know. And Tiffany, you can maybe address that a little bit,
Yeah,
middle school teacher.
it is handy to have it both ways, because especially when you're working and creating lesson plans and everything else, you don't necessarily want to click back and forth between 15 screens that you have up on your computer, so you just want a document for your reference. But about examples, I would be leery to list too many examples, because then as teachers, we want to make sure that we're doing exactly the right thing, so it's easy to fall into this is what this example is, so this is how I'm doing it, this is how I'm teaching all of it, it's just with this one example, which isn't necessarily everything that the kid needs to know about it. So examples are good to an extent, but I don't think that
They can be limited as well.
yes.
Because I think there was a year when there was an example out for before the math testing, and then the math test wasn't exactly that question, and so they got upset because it wasn't about the same question. So we don't want people to teach to the example, we want to teach to the standard, but the example is kind of an idea. So it's that, kind of like balance, how do you have that balance, because you want them to know, but yet if it's not exactly this, then they get upset if they're asked in what shape or form. So it's hard to keep that balance.
Well, it might be something that'd be interesting to, put out a survey and figure out how much detail do you want, because I agree, if you give a single example, people sometimes just hone in on that, and that's gonna be the only thing we do, but.
But it is good to have examples, especially in
Right.
some.
But
That's
as
all,
you're-
yeah.
And as you're working it out, if you're gonna go the approach to put it in an appendix or at the end of that section and work it out so you can show the steps that you want the kids to be able to do, well, then you start getting prescriptive and something like that. Now it's you're gonna make everybody happy.
Exactly.
Right.
We're not.
Majority.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thought we were.
I don't know if this is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say we don't want the assessment to become simply a compilation of the examples.
Absolutely not.
There would be a danger in that.
Well, and there's even a danger right now that people go out and look at, this is the most highly tested GLE, so this is what we're gonna teach to all the time. The most highly tested doesn't mean, sometimes that might be, it's the one way they think kids can get a point or get an entry point, not necessarily the most important things to do. So, so you have to be a little bit careful and cautious about all of those things. The teachers, unfortunately, because of the pressure I think that's put on, that they teach to exactly what they see rather than looking at these other things. It's not that they don't want, everybody wants to do a good job.
Just keep in mind all the different ways this document will be used when it's completed.
Well, it's gonna be used by assessment, it's gonna be used by teachers, it's gonna be used by curriculum coordinators. So, there's a lot of things.
May I say something, please?
You bet.
I want us to stay focused on our, job here is to write the standards and not necessarily to do everything that we've talked about, even though it's wonderful for teachers. The only reason I would put examples in for the second column that we called, examples, is to just clarify the wording. It's not necessarily to give, the teachers all of the, for us to write all of their examples for them, it's just to clarify what is intended by the standard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, especially in some areas where people are not as comfortable when you look at the statistics and probability. Because I think in our test, you're absolutely right, Nancy, our test is to write the standards and put the standards together. We have to think of the terms so we have those clear in our minds and make sure we're clear about the examples. I'm not sure our task is to put a glossary together and have all those components of it, because to have that together by October, first of all, would be overwhelming. And get it out for review, but I think you're absolutely right, Nancy, our focus is really on the standards themselves, and those are, for a working document, those are good ideas that you have there to help us with the clarifications.
Yes. For the clarification for ourselves, I
Right.
think the examples and definitions are very important.
Well, and especially since how many of you teach sixth grade, and going back, probably not, and going back with the dot plot thing, some language is different than when I was in school, because box and whiskers didn't even exist when I was in college, and so now when people say box and whiskers, I go, what the heck is that? I'm thinking about cat. When people say those things, terminologies change, having those clarifications, I think, for the whole group is a good thing to have. But not necessarily how it's gonna put out, that's part of the structure of standards, domains, what are the domains we wanna have. I think this is a nice working document that they have, the way they have this laid out and designed. But any comments about, and this is how 6 through 8 pretty much is that correct?
Yes.
Any questions or comments about the structure of what they put together?
So are we saying that we think that this is a good working structure and everybody's gonna
Well,
try?
I don't think everybody has to do exactly the same thing, but this is what they put together, so I think they're trying to explain what they did and why they did it.
But
This is not necessary.
I do think that it is number one reasonable for us to try to use the same general approach, so it's easily to go from one to the next. And I do support this type of structure. I think if we did it this way, I think it'd be.
And I think as a
Makes a lot of
working team, it would be nice, and we can't tell K through 5 what to do, but when I go back down and I look at elementary, sometimes the language they use is different, obviously, than some of the things I would use, and when they do an example, it's helpful for me to go back and read that document as a working example, not necessarily anything I would publish, but I'm not a K through 5 person, helps me understand And those people that are not high school people, maybe having some of those would help. Now, this is not anything final, but this is a start of the way they just laid out to help them work. And then I think it makes us, easy for us to go back and look at and read too. So, any other, yeah?
I think we do need to decide though whether we're going to include the example and explanation, because if the other subgroups start to work on this and feel like they have to get examples and explanations, and then we come back together and say we're not using that column, then we've spent a lot of time on something that's not going to be effective.
Well, I think the first thing is we have to get the standards there. Right, and decide, agree upon those, and then I think we go back and if we have a question as a team about a definition, does everybody have a question about this language, to come up with some definitions for our team. But I don't know that, we can recommend the structure, but I don't know if we can tell them the kind of structure that it's gonna have to be on college.
We've had a lot of discussion about clarity of language, and so I think that as the working document, I think it's really important to have those examples and explanations, because we want to make sure that the language we choose for the standard matches what we really mean. And so if we have that example there, maybe our example doesn't match up the language, and I know that Julie is going to be able to say that's not what you're really saying in the standard, so she's going to be able to fix that and catch that for us. And so that's I think it's really important.
Because when you write it, it's always clear to you.
And there's definitely not an intent that everyone has it.
That's what I was gonna say.
Nor a definition. It's just where we either questioned or said, maybe teachers need this, or from experience, this would help. I don't think it's fill every cell.
No, absolutely.
No, and there's no question about the fact that there are, in many instances, a half dozen ways to describe something. And if you've been around for a really long time, you've probably seen most of them, unless you're still young. But, my point is, we need to be respectful of, the people that are using these. Why do you think that, sometimes that can be helpful, so that people are not talking past each other about what they think it means and stuff like that.
Nancy's raising her hand.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I saw it.
Thank you. Hope you didn't see under my arm.
Okay.
I want to say that we do have access to what K through 5 is doing. It is in our Dropbox, and they are not doing a chart type thing at all. So they are just strict, at this point in that Dropbox, if you look at K-5 work group, they have the standards both in doc form and PDF, and it is strictly just writing the standards. I also want to say that I made a copy of the Algebra 1 folder you had, Kathy, and dropped it in the main folder, so you still have your own folder, but Maggie can access what you're talking about as you display it.
Yeah, where's the K through 5, Nancy? I see it says CA math standards under the K through 5 work group, but I don't see.
Yes, if you open that up,
Okay.
It has their introduction, and then
Maybe we'll
That's
open
the
it up.
California.
no, I'm sorry. You said CA, didn't you?
It says CA math standards, and then
Yes,
there's,
and I said the wrong folder. It's the K-5 work group notes.
got
They have it, I believe, by grade in there.
it.
So you can see their domains and standards, and they started writing. I don't know that they have every grade completed, but they have started talking about their domains and writing. Let's see, if you look, I think it was the 5th grade when I looked at. They started outlining, at least in this form, and I don't know how they're going to alter it, but they do have their standards more in a,
Slow, sorry.
yeah,
Mine's slowly opening, sorry, Nancy.
all right.
Maybe it's opening, maybe it's not. Somehow it doesn't want to open up, but we'll go ahead and kind of talk us through it.
Well, they have like grade, 5th grade, relationships and algebraic thinking. Number 1, represent and analyze patterns of relationships, and it's just in like a written form, like you would turn in a paper to a teacher or something, and then they have bullet points underneath it of what would be included there. represents and operations in base 10. Sorry about that, who is that, is that Julie?
That was me.
I'm sorry, I don't know why.
Yeah, so they just have like written out form, they don't have a table, is all I'm saying. So I don't know if that's gonna be a problem for us, our group, different, because once again, I think Kathy, as you said, I don't know that we can dictate the structure,
Right,
where to write the standards.
right. Let me try this again.
We had looked
I'm not
at,
sure they're totally separate things, to be honest with you.
Well, and they are not including examples and definitions, they.
Well, they might be doing it under there, I can't read it.
Well,
Yeah,
and
it's
that,
not-
that is an example in that one, but
Word is not,
that looks like the only one.
they brought that to us at a previous meeting, we talked about, there's a couple things that highlighted in yellow that they were still.
Right.
here we go.
So this may not be updated here.
Exactly.
And we could easily take our column one and put in their structure, but it just may be that.
Well, as a working, the structure that we use for the working document doesn't necessarily, that's what we're talking about, the one that's gonna be final. It's for ease of working, this is the way that it's gonna be, and then we can take it and put it into whatever format it needs to be put in, which we may not be able to decide anyway.
Column one could stand alone to look like K5, and then appendix A could look like our working document. So teachers have a choice of which one to pull up.
So this now is this is fifth grade.
Yes.
And I think kindergarten, you can get a clear look at. There's some that look like they've been pretty well completed, and others that just look like they're listing documents that they've used as reference,
And that's-
you know? But I think kindergarten has some content in it. Let me pull it up. The kindergarten academic learning standards. Is
Got
that what it?
Yes.
Along?
Yes.
So I was just saying that to you so that you guys would have some thoughts about it before you meet with them.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up, because we need to look, because there's a working document to work from, and then there's a document that they're gonna put out, and that's one of the things that in the end we'll have to come together on, definitely. But the working document for subgroups, I do like the structure of what they put together, but it doesn't mean that that's what it's gonna look like at the end, because we're gonna have to come to an agreement between all groups.
I can see why they wouldn't have, for some of these like these, why you wouldn't have examples and definitions, because those are really basic.
I'm telling you, working with elementary school teachers that I work all the time, yes, you do this. When you get into fractions and you get into a lot of other things. Yeah, but some of
No,
those,
I'm just talking about the first one that they had.
but you would be amazed at how they have differences of opinions about what that means.
Because now once you get to fifth grade with those, there they have examples.
Right, but remember, kindergarten is not necessarily,
Yes.
they're not necessarily anywhere close to being done, and they may decide, they'll come back in, I'm sure, and add things in as they need to add
But I
in,
don't,
if they feel they need
I
examples.
just don't think that they need examples. Just like we won't need examples on some of ours.
I mean, in working with kindergarten teachers, they sometimes question one of their standards is compose and decompose shapes.
Right, what does that mean?
So what does that mean? I mean, they still have some questions over it.
There's certain things that they're gonna have.
Right.
Well, and especially the fourth grade, fifth grade teachers, they're elementary teachers, they're not necessarily math teachers.
Right.
And so they don't always know the mathematical terms, they don't always, and now the mathematical terms are a lot more,
They're useful.
yeah, than they used to be. And so, you know,
They
they
have to
actually
expect,
what that was mean, it was not.
they expect them to use the appropriate method.
Appropriate
Instead of,
vocabulary instead.
right, instead of using, making up names, they're supposed to use the appropriate terminology that corresponds with.
The alligator is the bigger number. Oh, no, that's greater than us.
Yes, acting around alligators, yeah. Yeah, that's our favorite topic. So, Julie, you look like you have a question on your face.
No, I was just thinking, it's not even my
I still remember when my kids came in high school and started talking about the alligator eating, I go, what are you talking about?
They showed you, didn't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. I was like, what in the world is going on?
Well, next we think we'll probably have to decide our domains and structures too, to decide how, I mean, I think our columns are fine for working, and then once we kind of get all the details hashed out, whether we're gonna categorize it out, 1 out 2 geometry, or what we're gonna call our headings, I think that will determine our final product also. So I would say for now, just get standard down,
It's for
get a
us.
working document and
It's a
go.
working document for us. Because I think we have to get that, what's gonna work for us, and then I think how it's gonna be output to teachers, that's the next picture. But we've gotta get those standards and agree upon standards and what they mean. And I think having an example or a definition, whatever, is not clarified. When we look at some of our other standards, that could be saying in Algebra 2, say, hey, I don't really know what you're talking about, or in Algebra 1, that's not really clear to me. We need an example there for the working group to know what we're talking about. And I think, Tiffany, you made a really good point when you said you wrote an example to go along with it, and then Julie goes, no, that's not really what goes along with it, because sometimes we think it does, you know, or I do, and then somebody says, no, that's not what it says. So that's our, you know, we've got to get that in mind for us before we can put that out. But yeah, we do need to talk about eventually what we think would be a user-friendly structure for teachers and for schools to use. But that's at the end after we get all the standards. So they have a completely different structure, but they have, one of the things we have not talked about at the high school is the domains, like they have relationships and algebraic thinking. You have geometry and measurement. They have the domains of how to organize, because there does have to be some organizational flow within the context of what we work with and what we do. And so we probably, for high school, we need to come up with the terms that we're going to use for that, and then we can categorize them as we work wherever they fit. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Julie, did you have something you want to say? Go ahead.
No, not really. I was going to ask you to explain that again one more time, because I think I sort of missed, I didn't understand. And when we write the domains for high school, you're not saying that we need to follow, that they have to be the same as the elementary.
Oh, no, not at all,
Okay.
not at all. No, because when we get into high school, to me, functions is a huge emphasis. And so a domain of functions would be very appropriate. You know, we do statistic and probability, they don't do K through 5, but we need to have something, I think, that would be across at the high school level. And we haven't talked about.
Okay, yeah, for,
Yeah.
right.
Because
And
elementary
then
school, and then we're gonna have to see how they feed, and how well we can feed with one another, absolutely, we need to do that, but no, we don't need to use the same ones.
So you're just talking generally about
Yes.
something that would impose a little structure and maybe help people.
Right, because we also have to,
Organize.
because if we don't put the structure in, more than likely somebody's gonna have to put that structure in when they get back, you know, when you get your IBD reports and
Well,
you
let's
look
do it
back.
ourselves, we'll do much better.
So sometime, well, we think we do until we find out all the ways that they have to report all the documents every quarter. Somebody told me some of the things they have to do, I go, okay, great. But anyhow, but we could come up with some basic structure of what we think would work. And then those would fit in those particular places. And the other thing that we didn't talk about, but they did do is they, like in some places they have, do we want to put, if you write it for Algebra 2, are we going to put them into units? Or are we just going to put those under the domains and the schools districts decide how to put them into units themselves? Because I think there's sometimes it's a good thing to put into units to help teachers see, but on the other side of that, sometimes that gets in the way too, because we can't pick this textbook because this is not in this chapter in this textbook. That's not what the textbook heading says. So I don't want to get into that game. So those are other things that.
Right, and I do think that, you know, again, I think I've said this before, but when we get to that point where we're kind of talking about the end, boy, I do think we need to be clear as to, you know, the sort of ultimate game plan, vis-a-vis the, you know, higher ed curriculum and initiative, making sure that we have a complete, coherent process, but I do think we need to make a real effort to preserve that flexibility for districts and for teachers
Right.
to, you know,
figure out what works for their kids and the structure
Right.
that they have.
Right.
So.
Right, so put it in within the context and the structure that we have. And I know we had also talked about at one time, and I think we decided against this, we had talked about integrated versus algebra 1 geometry and algebra 2, but there weren't enough integrated districts that were using integrated math to really, that we don't have the time to really do that at this point.
Right, and I know that's a relatively minor approach, I think, and I wonder too, because we even as a district, you know, we're talking about, this is very preliminary, so I'm not trying to start rumors, but at least the idea of doing algebra 1, algebra 2, and then geometry, you know, and if you did that, you probably would not want to have those true functions, although I guess you could, so, I don't know, I'm flexible, I think you can do things lots of ways and have it make sense. I mean, I've certainly done things in a myriad of ways over the years of my life, so, so I think there's no wrong way to teach really.
I have a question, and it's just a question, looking at, considering structure, does it make any sense, does the structure impact what will happen on the assessment side of things? Because we're going to do a new assessment to align with these standards, and we need to be thinking about that at all in terms of structure.
I think that if we put a preliminary structure together, then, you know, Mark, you've had probably much more experience than I have.
In the past, when I've written items for our grade level assessments, our math assessments, they just hand you a paper with the standard at the top
Okay.
and ask you to write an item. You turn yours in, and if it's similar to somebody else's that's already been turned in, you get it back. Could you write it a little different so that they do get a pool, a variety of questions addressing the same standard?
Okay, so the overall structure doesn't matter.
You know, they might ask you to write a 1-point question or a 2-point question, but not really what this, you know, there's not a lot of detail.
And I do know when we originally wrote the GLEs, because we were flying by the seat of our pants trying to figure out a way to put that together, we put some things out, and then they added structure in later that organized, which probably would have been easier for us to write if we had thought about ways of organizing before. So kind of like it sometimes in the Common Core document, they'll have a big domain, but then they'll have a sentence and that organizes some of those concepts together, some kind of organizational structure. So we might think about that. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea.
So that's
Sometimes
more meaningful to the teachers.
it is, it also helps with assessment for coding and things, that this is this. Like, we might have a standard, but that standard might be under creating equations, and it makes sense to read creating equations that helps you make sense. This is why this standard is written. So, those are things I think that, I think algebra 1, especially algebra 2, we're gonna have to sit down and talk about some of those issues.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say on that question, you know, given the amazing size of the testing of Piedmont at this point, based on enormous growth in the past, 10, 15 years, I don't know how many of us could not think about it, as we're writing, but, to me, a system that's driven by assessment is not a good system. So, I mean, I'm cognizant of it, and I also, now I'm getting, this is before I really wanted to bring it up, but with so much in assessment, kind of on the table at this point, I think we could even consider, I mean, nobody's going to want to do this right now, so please just, let me just bring it up. But, the idea of grades being standards, I still think, there's a real question. Some kids are not ready for something at a certain level, and that the idea that, kids have to do this at a certain age, and I know that I'm supporting that every day when I look at my classroom and see my classes, none of which are a single age group. All of my classes have, well, not physics, but all my math classes have 3 levels. I have freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, all in algebra 2 honors, and they all deserve to be there. We put every kid in algebra 1 in the 8th grade. Some of them just didn't make it, but yet you know, a couple of years later, they can still be in Algebra 2 honors doing really well. And that could be a personal family experience, et cetera, that was happening during their 8th grade year. But it also can be, you know, they just weren't developmentally ready and now they are. And so I think, you know, there is a wide range and I sort of support the idea of ranges. And so that's just.
Well, and I think that's why, Algebra 1, it necessarily took the algebra test when they're ready for it. So if they're ready for it by the end of 9th grade, then they're ready for it by the end of 9th grade. But if they're taking it their sophomore year, they're taking it their sophomore year. So that's when they went to that you take when you're ready for that test. That was the high stakes test, that's the high stakes test.
Right.
So you take it if you're ready for it in 8th grade, great. If you're ready for it in 5th grade, great. Okay, but that was the high stakes test that everybody tested, that you take it at that grade. And the grade stand issue, you know, that's not anything that we can really address. There's different data on both sides, because I just read one the other day that said grade span doesn't work, testing doesn't work, and then I read one the other day that grade span testing does work, so I think there's differences on that. We can find data on both sides, so.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, I don't think we can.
I don't know if we can do, you know, I'm still kind of just processing that, but I think with, you know, what's going on, you know, with feds and, you know, and then that'll, and we'll see by the,
Well, no child
end of
left
our
behind,
process, we'll know.
the No Child Left Behind definitely changed the way we do things, but I'm just, when I go into schools right now and work with 5th grade teachers, teachers are not wanting to teach 5th grade because they are the ones that are testing. You know, they have all the heavy weight of the testing, and so sometimes the grade span is not good because they really don't, and then they're concerned about the 3rd and 4th grade teachers not teaching what they need to have to get them ready for some of the things that they have to do. So there's pros and cons to that, but I don't think we can, it's a good point, but I don't think we can, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we can, I mean, yeah, and I totally get that, and I would want to be supportive of teachers, and I think it would really apply to high school because we're sort of a course, but still.
So for the high school, do we feel we need to come up with some domains, because middle school has their domain names. We did not, as a high school, choose any domain names. We were just kind of going through them in the document, we didn't make any choices. I don't know if we are ready to do that at this point, but it does help you with the organization of your standards somewhat, to be able to have some specific domains. I mean, we could say preliminary domain names and then come back at a later time and say this is not working for us.
And not that they have to be exactly the same as the ones that 8th grade has, but it is nice when there's overlap because of the 8th graders that take Algebra 1.
Right. So we can look at that and do that, but are we in agreement or not? Do we want to put those in the units of study, or do we just want to write the standards under domains? Standards with the domains and then up to the districts for them to decide how to fit those standards.
Otherwise, the comment you made on textbooks, individual teachers, all of that, let them do the same.
Let them decide how they want to put that together. Does everybody agree? Yeah, let them have the control of putting it together, how they choose to put it together. When you put it in units of study, because I know I've talked to teachers when we look at some things and they go, well, it says it has to be done that way. And I said, no, it's just a suggestion. You know, it's not a dictate, it's a suggestion. So, and I think sometimes leave it more open, and then if people come back and say, how do you put that together, that's their district and their curriculum coordinators to try to put that together. Or in a small school district, the teacher may be the curriculum coordinator for K through 5 math or whatever. So do we want to talk about domains for high school? Are we ready to talk about that? Do we feel?
Kathy,
Yes, ma'am.
I am going to have to go soon. I have one young lady arriving from Washington DC and one from San Francisco. Their brother's picking them up from the airport. But I want to give this input as far as domains or whatever you're going to call them at the high school level for, of course, I think Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 should be consistent as much as possible. Although there are things that you cover in Algebra 2, you don't cover in Algebra 1.
Yeah.
And I would strongly encourage you to keep it, I'm not saying institute the Common Core as written, because you know I have problems with that structure, particularly at high school. But make sure that there is some kind of smooth transition, because it is what teachers are using now, and we do want this to be an easy transition again for them, because you know as a classroom teacher how much it's going to take. And as a school board member, I want to remind you how much money is involved when you change all of this dramatically for school districts without some kind of direction of where it's coming from and where it's going, either a correlation of current standard to what you're going, or at least the domain somewhat the same.
I agree, you know, to look at that and to have that, because that, in working with teachers, classroom teachers, just to have that know, where it came from, what it correlates with, because if we don't have some idea of how to do that, somebody's going to have to come up with that to help teachers in what districts. So that's a really good point, Nancy, thanks for bringing that up. So,
And once again, I am not endorsing just dumping the high school Common Core into that, I'm not, but please make it the structure somewhat the same and that is for the ease of the teachers.
yeah, I agree.
Okay,
Well,
and
and it shouldn't be just me, but yeah, we'll definitely bring that up and talk about that. Okay. Bye, Nancy, and
I'm gonna sign off.
hey,
Take care.
take care.
Hey.
Bye, Nancy.
Kathy, I think the K-5 is taking a break.
Okay, so K-5, shall we take a break and then see when and if they want to meet today and do that? So why don't we take a 10-minute break? Okay, and then Fred, Fred, you and somebody else we were talking to last time, right?
Yes.
Oh, I don't, who was that other person? That was kind of the liaison with K-5.
Okay.
Huh?
On their side, you mean?
No, and I think it was Fred and somebody else, I can't remember.
What?
Well, take about a 10-minute break, and we'll be back in about 10:40, so I'll.
Hey, Kathy,
Yes.
do you mind if I sign off now, and then if I get back by 1:30, do you mind if I bring back in?
You can ring on anytime you want.
Okay, thank you, because I think by the time you get your break done, I'm gonna have to be heading out.
Sounds good. Talk to you later, bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, bye-bye.
COE left yesterday.
The
The only thing is, and it's a personal preference, I think they were there until 10 o'clock one night. Our managers just say, right, building trades and they're great. They were more used to like college structure, so like they want building trades and say framing, masonry, and they wanted like course, they consider building trades in the program, they wanted course grades, and we're like, it's one thing, so they had to reprint the last 2 years' transcripts with the transcript on the front and the competencies on the back. We're like, we have what you want, even more detail. So they finally made me happy to print 2 years' transcripts with right on the front, the competencies on the back. But that was about the only thing I think that when they made their pre-visit, we had to do all, so just yeah. I really can't.
But you need my students don't have access. They have their mom's dad.
That's what our financially coordinator was.
It's not
She was just last week. See what he's coming in February. Or just now asking, did your wife go to marriages or did your teachers? And she's like, you're just now asking. I don't know, I'm not looking a little more. So yes, when the team had no, there were 3 groups, no recommendations, no suggestions, and no something else. So we're hoping that we're okay. We have 3 programs that didn't go through because they were having post time. It wasn't, we had like 13 programs go through, so, yeah, pretty much close. Yeah. And some of them, like, just because of past requests and stuff, like we have a welding and ethnic and advanced welding for the kids that want to come back, and then we have a decent advanced piece. So those were 2, we really had a lot of it. I had to make those separate courses for COE, so. Yeah, it's quite the ordeal. It's done. It's done. Hopefully we get 6 years. So you already had your pre-visit, so that's good. Wow. And they really, you know, they kept telling us over and over and over, we're going to have the supers in the building, we're going to have secretaries, janitors, we're going to have everybody. And once talked to me, and I don't know, the janitor after the first day, he said they never talked to him, so I don't think they ever got to everybody. I think they're talking about just the actual programs.
If they're doing stuff along.
The credit is that,
Yeah, I don't know, yeah, she's gonna be attentions for us. So, those students are he's going there, those and staff is.
we have to major be clarified, I mean, he's shift out so much, which, oh, this is good, it's just thorough, yes. We have declarified, and our filing cabinets, we're not in the fire proof room. So they have to put in all these new walls, and all, I don't know what I'll do about the shops, but I know they were scrap, he came, you know, buy all sorts of, locked cabinets, all the chemicals.
She says it was just, well, she has them, just very nice.
I don't know, for 6 years now. Yes, that's what I said today. Hyperlinking and actually they can go back to teaching.
Notes, and then they have to come back and they come back to the it, and then people get started on assignment, and we have to put it like on the screen, so that they can do it while I help others, you know, or they get programs and things like this.
All our California, our page bridge program, and general management. Well, those.
Trying to start as a math lab before, and I just learn what teacher in like 8 minutes.
Right.
Work it,
So we had
but
time.
I'm not sure.
We can't have any of those out because the program names didn't match, that's their, one of their big pet peeves is when the program names didn't match and everything. So because it said auto collision, we couldn't stop like, oh, it's not like it's even, you know, confusing. But yeah, because it didn't say the exact right time. Everything had to be. Yes.
Yeah.
You're a morning person?
I'm a morning person.
Yeah, and all has to be hyperlinked, and luckily we're able to say you're back in the same spot, but then every time we make a change, and it doesn't put it away, but it is a beast.
Yeah.
Process wise, even if you're just pursuing us.
And she,
Dan Brown. You work in the actual or something behind
but,
that.
I mean, that was some good ideas, I really like the idea about how they can.
Well, you know, actually, I mean, it's sort of like to
All the parents, I don't know if it was the way it was presented, but
I think it's
all of the parents who could use students watching videos. It doesn't look great.
Instead of
Having
having.
to do it.
Well, and I
Well,
guess
and
that's.
then, and then they came back and they said, oh, yeah, okay, we remember that. Oh, yeah, now I know what your dad's are.
I had like 6
And
seconds, when I have you, I use videos to teach my kids because my substitutes.
Right,
It's not-
right.
So I use videos and when I'm gone, I was making videos with my kids, and I teach on live. Well, then, you know, they watch that and that helps and that kind of thing, but I do educating videos too, if you use educating.
No.
If I automatically copy the video, I sit here, I ask the question, and the kids have to answer the question.
Well,
So.
This is what I was when I was sitting by you. And it was like upstairs, we're out there, it was like very logical.
It's free.
I was like, oh, that's what you're like this. But I see people in here, it's like, what's wrong?
Also, Christian universities, entrepreneurship.
So do you think respecting is working with those two that couldn't?
I am fine.
Last year,
a scenario like that arises, especially with Nancy, when she's still in grade.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I'm actually in Michigan now. I'm sorry.
It's craziness. It's just school to choose.
Might be me though, when I was up at the circuit group, one time, there was actually just everybody, I write it on the insurance. Strike me and they're on, and, like, this is secondary, on the east side, I video chat, phone call, that's it. Which means it's like, you can have every person log into Skype and be on.
Well, we have good stuff.
But it doesn't start, you got your thought process. Yeah, it's been a the deal is like 2004. Well, the latest one is 2008. I'm not sure I was able to look on the for any kind of guideline.
Oh, yeah.
I understand what you're saying. I because we used to do it that way.
Right. Well, it's still
There's really not and realizing this is always was having principles of action.
Because they're from here.
Although I have you because they know nothing about it, and they said that's the people who are complaining about it because they can see nothing worse than if you remember the first time the tests were
well, part of this, you know, I feel like I'm talking to this It's not really not, it's reality.
And it's not, it was for something sort of taking a couple of years.
Yeah.
Okay, I think, is everybody's back? So we'll go ahead and get started, and Fred went over and talked to the other group, was there, and so if you want to relay kind of the discussion again, this is good.
Essentially, they are making good progress right now, no longer interrupted just yet. They're going to, but they do they do want to get together probably sometime today. And they'll get back to us probably around lunchtime as to when that best time would be for them.
Because a little bit of the discussion is that we know today that we're both here and that we're side by side. They, I don't think, have necessarily on the calendar a room for when their next meeting is. And it could be that they're meeting all the way across the area, all the way across. So we were thought just a few minutes maybe to at least touch base, but they said they're making really good progress. And so it kind of went to work, so you're absolutely right. So, right, yeah, I think they're looking at kindergarten, so their kindergarten group, they're really trying to work on the kindergarten document right now. And they feel they have an over amount of work to do. I wonder who else feels that way? I think that's what all the rest of us. So when we left, one of the things we wanted to talk about is domains. Do we want to have a discussion for the 9 through 12, what we think might be appropriate domains? We don't have to be locked into that at this point, but it would probably be a good idea for us to have a discussion about what we might think those appropriate domains would be, so we can organize standards to be in the appropriate places. Is any discussion on that? Dave, you shaking your hand? Yes. So for the record, Dave is shaking his hand, yes, because that will help the organization, I think. So what are some thoughts of the group for domains? Because I put it on the Algebra 1 document, but I just put them there to get started. So, and we can talk about I'll pull up the Algebra 1 document. I also have a paper copy of the Algebra 1 document for everybody to kind of look at in a couple of minutes. But let me just tell you what I put on there: algebra, number, and functions. And then we don't have anything, we haven't really talked about probability and statistics yet, but we have no problem stats. So I kept them pretty generic: algebra, functions, number, and probability and statistics. So that's kind of what I put to help me organize or help us do some things. Discussion about that, what do we think is appropriate? And you talked to Tiffany as an 8th grade teacher. How will that flow from the document you guys have been working on? Because we want to make sure that flows.
Just for my clarification, when you're talking domains, on the Common Core thing, you're talking about the things in the gray bars?
Yes.
Well, the domain though is even bigger than that.
No, it's in the gray bar.
Well, maybe it'll take a couple.
Right. Would be like the overall.
As far as the.
Right, these things, those are the domains.
Yeah, okay.
And so I just took a big picture item there to start off with, and then we can organize the things after that. So, Julie, what's your discussion on that?
Right, I would love to, first of all, I would love to see a paper copy, because I like to write.
Well, that's why I brought
paper
paper copies.
copies.
Okay, and again, we'll talk about this in a minute, so there is nothing sacred about anything that's down here, and I'll explain to you a little bit about this in a minute, if you just have it. And I just put the big heading of algebra, and here's the one for algebra, here's the one that's functions, here's the one for number. So I just put this kind of broad, and I'll explain to you a little bit more about it when we talk about it. But right now, I think just talking about the structures of the big ideas.
You know, that's, and maybe, you know, this is just us teaching pretty similar in various,
Right.
you know, but, you know, the system that exists in my head for the way I organize my algebra sheet class, you know, is, you know, algebra as one topic and functions. Now, there's some little things that could kind of go either way, like where you put systems, because you can kind of see algebra, but you can also approach it, you know, with a view towards functions, depending on what you're going to do. I would say the same thing about sequences, but But I think those are the right categories. I mean, and that is how I think of it. And I don't, you know, with few little exceptions. Those are the big.
The big topics in
Yeah.
algebra chemistry. For
We
clarity.
need to clarify
Yeah,
domain because we've
Right.
been kind of talking about,
Two different,
Yes.
yes.
and so we need to be sure we're talking about what we're talking about.
Because I was gonna clarify, you have them by conceptual
Conceptual
categories,
categories, yes.
not domains.
Right.
Whereas grades K through 8, we call them domains instead of.
The common core domain is the grade.
It's a gray box, but
The rest of
these
the-
are actually the
kind of
high
talk about-
school conceptual categories.
Right, so and so that's what we have for that, that's why I organized it by algebra, so we had big ideas that, like you said, the conceptual categories. Getting down into specific domains, we may not be.
You may not want,
Well,
or you may not,
We may not want them.
you may not need them in the
Well, sometimes what I think is that some of those domains that we have might be better off if it's that critical to actually be written into the standard itself. So like if everything falls under create equations, okay, maybe we should say, start off with create equations to do this, or create equations to do this, or model to do that. That way the action comes into the standard itself if we think it's necessary. So domain, are we okay with the cluster, are we calling them the cluster headings? Are we okay with algebra, functions, number, and cross stack as the?
you can't really call them cluster headings.
No, there wouldn't be cluster headings. We can figure out.
We just need a new name.
Yeah, a new name for, I agree. Categories.
Yeah, I like that.
Keep it simple, right? Do those 4 big ideas for algebra 1 or those 4 categories, do those work for algebra 2 as well, do you think, Julie, from what you're doing to organize them?
Yeah, I think so, because when and you know, and I haven't really shared this document because I feel like it's not ready for, well, I have shared it some, but not with the whole group, because I feel like it's not ready for prime time at all, but one thing we did accomplish over the break, you know, is to, and I can pass it around, I brought hard copies too for people, but it is a little more than a list, and how I think I like to start with lists, because then it's like, don't forget this, don't forget that. And when you look at a number of the topics in algebra 2, you are, you know, sort of picking out and filling in those extra things for algebra 1, you know, negative exponents, and I forget, you know, some different things that, you know, are on there. Adding more kinds of functions, the log functions, and things that you.
Well, and you do some more things with exponential functions than you would do in algebra
Than
1,
you would,
because now that you have logarithmic functions, now it's
You
not
had
going
to
to come into
do
place.
that, right. And, you know, and so, and it's all in there, you know, and so we kind of have to figure out, you know, what the algebra 1 is going to include before we can finalize that.
You might want to consider the one additional category in algebra 2 is trigonometry.
Well, that's right. Although that, under the current system, you know, you get some of that in geometry, and then if you turn around and put in the trig functions, although like I don't want to get bogged down in the testing things, but like this year, they're not
I mean, just the category of trigonometry for algebra 2, because there are aspects to that would be included.
Well, and part of that is I don't think you can finalize what trig you do in algebra 2 without knowing what geometry is going to do.
right.
With what trig specifically are they going to deal with in geometry? And then what trig are you going to deal with in algebra 2?
Which
And that really falls under functions, so
Right.
you can have,
Right.
you put all your trig clusters together, well, trig is, in algebra 2, if that's what they do.
That's the way
in
we do it currently,
Right.
is trig functions are in algebra 2 and trig right.
Triangle trig is
geometry.
geometry. Right.
So,
And so that, and Beverly, were you know?
I was just saying, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it could fall under functions, but I think a lot of that is going to depend, kind of what you were saying, Julie, is that what you do with trig in algebra 2 is going to depend on what's done with trig in geometry, okay, as well as some of the others.
So those 4 functions those 4 categories, categories or
Whatever
function, stats, and probability?
I think algebra functions, number, and probability, that would fall under algebra 1 and algebra 2, because I think that geometry is a course in itself. The geometry topic is another big cluster, but it's like, and we might even talk about though, are there some geometry concepts that we should be, I don't think we would put a cluster, but I'm hoping teachers use geometry in their algebra 1 class and use geometry in their algebra 2 class. In the way that they deal with the work of problems, but I don't think there would be any new standard that would be a matter of using what they learned in the past from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, using those ideas and those concepts. Areas, perimeters, volumes, exactly. Coordinate geometry, a lot of things need to do with coordination table. So, those categories, we're okay with those categories, at least as a starting ground, and then if we come back to it later, we might decide and tweak it from there. Okay, do you want me to talk a little bit about algebra 1 and what you see here? Okay, so, and I'll take this on me, is that I didn't get started when I should have gotten started. A lot of reasons for that, but we will go into those. And my Christmas break was Christmas Day and New Year's Day, so we don't get a vacation. So I did that, and I did some of this on Christmas Day. So anyhow, what I did is I went through, when we talked about the information, the standard, where it says CC, that was the Common Core standard with any wording changes that we talked about, at least that I had in my notes, and that doesn't mean that I got everything anywhere close. Where it says MA, it was Massachusetts. Okay, and sometimes they were addressed in both, so if it says MA, it was Massachusetts, if it says CC, it's from the Common Core. And so I kind of went through there, I took out where it said exponential functions, took that out, tried to make some wording changes, a little bit within that, but it kind of went directly from the Common Core itself, so that's really not much change to it. And then the middle column is more about looking at some of the wording to maybe be a little different. Now, I will tell you that I did some research, went out and looked at other states, and what some people are doing that was interesting is the standards that we have looked at and did some clarification on. Most of the states are doing some clarification under the same standards. Okay, so when they're looking at those standards, and it's clarifying, because I don't think we disagree with necessarily the content, but it's how it's organized, the clarification of wording, a lot of those things. And so that's what I kind of did, is cut and paste from some other places. So I have no idea of this possible change. Some of those were my words, but a lot of them are not. And so those are just some things for us to be thinking about and looking at. And so I don't take any ownership of that. I just wanted to pull that out, put that out front, that this is where I started. I had no ownership of this whatsoever. I just tried to put the pieces of what we had talked about as a group. And it also, the reason I did this as well, because I saw one state kind of had this in this proposal change. I liked it from what Nancy said about saying, this is where we were, okay, so this is the standard, this is how it's been tweaked and adjusted. And, for teachers to know, because someone's going to have to do a crosswalk to say, this is what it was, this is what it relates to later. But if we can change it to anything that we want, I just kind of got started here. So, do you want to take a few minutes and just kind of look at it? And again, wording, that's how I organized it. It doesn't mean that I get any ownership of it whatsoever.
And I think having the additional column of examples and explanations will be very helpful.
Right, yeah, that we can put that in as well. And what, depending upon what our Algebra 1 team wants to do, is this could be one document that we have a standard and how it relates, and then have another document where that is what the standard, how we've changed it, examples, definitions. I'm more than glad to put a couple of documents together so we can say, this is where we were, this is what we changed it to. Now let's put the examples and let's put in the definitions and things of that nature. So I'm open to suggestions, but for me, I need to see for teachers too. I think Tiffany has talked about this and addressed this. Like, this is where we are. This is what we changed it to.
You've got that for first
You
one.
said she could come in anytime, so we just talked really quickly with our group, and I don't know if we're ready yet. We haven't really talked about structure within our group to really have a conversation, so we're trying to decide on dates. Hopefully we can find a date that we.
We're all gonna be there
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe in the future, try to look at it.
Hopefully.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we have
Before
one
we-
week today, will you guys try to get your dates?
Oh, yeah, we're working on it now.
Why don't you tell her our dates?
They're on the website, they're on the
Oh,
website, yeah.
Yeah, they're on the website, so they have them on.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. So, yeah.
Well, I have a question, maybe you said it, but I missed it. At column, a possible change, if it's blank, does that mean we're not changing it or we're omitting it?
Well, when we looked at, and that's a really good point. I think when we went through the document, read it, we didn't really necessarily see any big problems with the standard itself. So we didn't look at changes, and interestingly enough, the documents, and I looked at, was it one or two states, they left the same ones alone that we didn't have, seem to have much of a problem with. It was kind of
Evidently have clarity. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly, right, so they pretty much left the same ones alone that we left alone. I thought that was really nice,
that was
pretty succinct.
it did, I mean,
So, and that was a really good point, though, good point. So please, again,
And the italics, just,
if what,
is there a reason for the italics?
probably I copied and pasted. Sorry, Fred,
Okay, there's
it was a late night, that's a good question.
Because it's an example.
That's the way it is in the Common Core.
Yeah, it is, and so I copied and
Okay.
pasted, that's pretty much a Common Core,
Just like
but
that.
I do like the fact that you guys pulled the example out away from the standard and put it side by side with the standard, so I do like that. After I saw that, I
the
appreciate
examples we didn't like, I mean,
Right.
the
The
suggestion,
EGs.
Yeah.
It's
was-
about, um,
it was the bottom, I mean, we
Yeah.
wanted
Right.
to clarify and make those better.
Call it a bomb.
That's what
That-
Amy
was-
called it, because he kept saying, I don't like the EG. I think it was a good thing.
It was
That
was an acronym.
It's not derogatory at all.
The column originated with a suggestion from Bob.
Yes.
I think that that should be in the official document, the bottom column.
No, we approved it, so. Yes.
So are these complete as far as algebra one?
Those are the ones that we went through, we didn't go through any probability statistics.
Okay.
So there's nothing there for probability statistics, not there because we did not have any discussion on that. So, and again, and it was just like, I changed the wording in the Common Core document that was said, and that's just the document was said, and then I found online these things that seemed to clarify. So I don't take any ownership of it, it's just not around, that's why it's.
Right, I was just wondering, you know, how far, I guess.
It's a very.
How far down the list did we get? But
Well,
so
we got
besides-
everything for probability statistics, I got all of the probability statistics in there, I mean, that's something that's gonna take us some time to do, so I just wanted to have this, something that I thought we could look at today. I think it's, so whatever you want, doesn't love me.
So, you're wanting, so for example, let's see, this is on your second sheet of paper, so I guess that's the third page, where it says, you know,
This is the beginning of algebra.
yes,
Okay.
so CC uses the structure of an expression to identify ways to rewrite it.
Right.
And then, for example, you get your, difference with quarter power, blah, blah, blah. And then you have your clarification, so use the structure of an expression to rewrite it in different equivalent forms. You know, to me, that's getting a little closer to plain and ordinary language, which I like.
Right.
But then I look at it and I think, what sorts of expressions? How do we, I'm gonna give them a little classroom form and have them rewrite that, I would say no. But, I think we need to try and figure out
This
how
might
to
be-
be a little more specific, does that make sense?
Yeah, because sometimes you try to be too general and it's, you try to
And then
be
you're-
generic and then it's too general that nobody has a clue as to what it means.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's where, again, I don't think, again, as far as like the assessments, but you're not limiting it for some imaginative person to write.
Yeah.
And can I just be honest, what would be a terrible question, so that, that people might not anticipate? I think, most of us, have our own little set ideas of, what they need, but.
And this could be one that, there are several of these that I think are in here that can be algebra 1 and algebra 2, but limited to specific things.
And that's what I'm thinking, of expression, I don't know, I guess I'd have to put some thought on that too, and I would hear.
Like, do we want linear and quadratic, that's
But,
limited
yeah.
to a certain linear.
So,
Linear
yeah, so I
quadratic
think
and
if we spell that out, that would be helpful for people to, and really, I'm trying to put limitations on it, because.
I really do think it's helpful to know, like, very clearly algebra 1 is this, algebra 2 is this, because I know that reading through sometimes I'm like, wait, because in this part of the document it says limited to algebra 1, or, algebra 1 is limited to this, but in this part of the document it doesn't say that. If I'm not looking at both of them, it's really confusing. I also had a note in that same area, that we were gonna add zero product property, because it's in the standards, but it's not mentioned by name.
Okay.
And
And
it's like,
Well, that comment is over there, on the first one under algebra. First page of algebra. Says we talked about, it doesn't have anything specific. Something.
Did I put it off, right? Yeah, that's it.
oh, I put it on the one that you sent earlier, so
Oh,
it's
okay.
probably in the electronic copy.
Okay, so there.
Oh, yeah, no, it was the comments on the one that you first sent.
Yes.
Oh, the
That-
first
that's
one,
got
okay.
it.
That I got through.
Okay, so you made some
Oh,
comments.
okay, I'm sorry.
So
I
that's
turned off yours.
It's okay.
And I printed this out from.
That's fine, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that.
Okay.
Zero product property,
Yes.
and that's on under the first thing you're gonna ask
That's
for.
right there.
Okay, good. I don't remember which one exactly we said it in.
You had that under the interpretation parts of expression, as terms of factors, coefficients, and then right across from that, that's where you had the comment.
I think so, that's where my sticky is. I think that's where it was.
So, to make sure I'm understanding that, so including zero product property, is that the place for it?
And I think that's a discussion we had and we weren't sure, but that somehow we need
Did it
to
need to be
incorporate
in
zero
there
product
somewhere?
property.
As, specifically mentioned.
And so what I'm gonna do is open up a blank file for algebra 1 standards, and I'm just gonna put zero product property where.
Well, I just wonder if you pull up to the next page, so we've got the second algebra page, the back of the second piece of paper on the hard copy, where you have choose and produce an equivalent form of an expression to reveal, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
properties. So under part A, you reveal the zeros of the function. I don't know. So you've got an expression, and then it switches over to function.
Yeah, this is kind of like what you were talking about, sometimes they overlap from algebra and function, so, and there are going to be those.
Yeah.
There's no way I don't want to put the standard in there twice, one time in the functions, one time in the algebra, so.
Yeah, but I guess, I'm just, okay. I mean, I try to make a big deal out of the difference between an expression and an equation, and
Yeah, and you should.
a variable in there, which, is potentially could turn it into a function, so, I don't know where that goes, but the zero product property, at least initially, is used to reveal solutions to equations.
Right.
So, if you don't have an equation, then I guess you don't.
Right.
You don't have any.
If you're just dealing with expressions, then obviously we
That
would
doesn't
have
fit.
that zero product property fits in when we talk about.
So, yeah, so that's the same on the first one, that's talking
Right,
about
it's
expressions.
Good.
And, I mean, I guess I'm not offering anything here. Maybe down on the next page, represent constraints by equations, systems of equations. But somewhere where you are factoring quadratics, that's where that goes.
That's on the second page of column, they talk about factoring quadratics.
But it says to reveal the zeros. In our algebra one class, at the college level, a big focus is factoring in general, and I didn't see that in this document. The various forms, recognizing the forms in factoring.
Well, like, in our algebra class, we have to teach that before we can do the other. So, I mean, it might not be in here saying that I have to teach it, but I know in order for them to be able to find the zeros, they have to be able to factor, so it's one of the things I teach them.
You teach factoring. There are a lot of things that we teach in class that are not in the standard anywhere that you have to do it to be
But
able
it's
to
got to
teach
list
them.
up there.
So if they're gonna factor a quadratic expression, then that tells me I have to factor. I have to teach factoring.
So what you want those sub-points, the types?
The types,
No,
I would
I
like
like
to see
the
it
types.
somewhere, because what I
The
see,
difference of squares,
what I've seen for students coming out of high school is they do not recognize those trinomial squares. They have everything by trial and error. And I think if we're going to ask them to complete the square, there has to be a big emphasis on recognizing trinomial squares somewhere.
So,
And I don't know, when we just say factor any quadratic expression, are teachers going to understand that they need to recognize those various forms?
So like some of the others, they can just be bullet points, A, B, C, D,
I'll put a
under.
comment.
And there was something in your
That
class.
certainly includes some examples right there of what we need.
I don't remember where it was something about some difference of cubes, so we did specify certain forms here. And
Well, and part of it was some difference of cubes and algebra one was different, that's not something that you traditionally would have taught in algebra one, it's more than algebra two.
Right, and I'm thinking, I might be wrong, Rosa, but you might have seen that in my Algebra 2 document, and that came from, or one place it comes from, is the Higher Ed Curriculum Alignment Initiative document, and so there are in that, you know, I mean, these are what kids have to know, and so, so I know that that is something that we have down, that you could definitely do the perfect squares and the difference of squares at the Algebra 1 level, but then you might not do the cubes, or, you know, and I mean.
Two difference of cubes.
But, I guess in keeping with my language approach, you know, like for this factor quadratic expression to reveal the zeros of the function it defines, what if we factor a quadratic expression just to know how to do it, and then we find the zeros when you're dealing with quadratic functions? Does that make sense to people? It does to me.
Well, that's how we teach it, I mean.
I know.
Yeah, I assume you do.
And I think that,
It follows.
since it says specifically complete the square, then we know that we've got to go back and recognize those perfect square trinomials and things like this. If they don't know how to recognize it, they're not going to get used to completing the square back then, it's not going to make sense to them. So even though it doesn't specifically say, make sure they know how to factor in these ways, we know that to get them there, we kind of need to do this first. I would think most teachers know that, but maybe not, maybe we need to.
Well, I think it goes back to, if we wanna make it that, you know, when you talk about being too prescriptive, there's that balance. Being too prescriptive, I as an algebra 2 teacher, as an algebra 1 teacher, always taught the difference of squares, whether it was in the book or not. I always taught perfect square trinomials, whether it was in the book or not, it didn't matter.
But you got somebody here saying that clearly lots of other people aren't, because she's getting students that aren't recognizing that, so maybe it needs to be said.
Well, but here's my take on that, is I may have taught it. But as I taught it in algebra 1 or algebra 2, and they had it their sophomore year in high school, and then they go to college 3 years later, they may very well have seen it, but they don't remember it. And so a lot of times we say it hasn't been taught, and so I think I shared the time when I had algebra 1 kids that couldn't do something in algebra 2. They didn't, and I told them they did, and they said they had never done it. Well, they had because I was their teacher, they didn't know the teacher, so.
And they can do a great job on it in algebra, because like in 8th grade, you know, they just took a test over it, they did a fantastic job with that. When they get to algebra 2, I guarantee you there's some teachers who will say you didn't teach that. And
Right.
look at their scores, look at their test scores.
And it's not that it's assessment, and kids will just be like.
Yeah.
So I think that in many cases, it might depend on when you come. And it also at the college level might be the kid maybe didn't have it and they skipped through school without taking some courses that they probably should have taken at the time. So I don't think that kids not knowing things when they come to college is always a true test. I think it is in some cases, but you have a lot of kids that may have not taken it down for 3 years.
Right.
So
We get all the
It's
signs
an
that-
issue that we're really not able to address in this
yeah,
work.
we can't, yeah.
I don't, and that brings up another question. Are we able, when we turn in our final document, to say, these are a couple of the issues that we discussed that you.
I mean, we can put it in the notes, but there are certain, all we can do is make a recommendation for the standards, I think. I don't think, we can make recommendations, but ultimately, they don't have to follow that.
Right, and you're not gonna fix, kids making choices for themselves, especially in the upper grades, I mean.
And you're not
It's
gonna,
not,
you're not gonna fix the teachers that only teach one form of the equation wrong. They're just, that's what they think is important, and that's all we're gonna do. So, and sometimes it's because that's all they really know, but, you're not gonna fix it, so, David, you have a question?
What you put in the right-hand column there would also fit very well if you scroll up to the bottom of the previous page.
This one? To rewrite?
That concepts are very connected with that previous one.
Okay, so why don't I copy and paste them and put them in both places, and then we can do it.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna type in the comments, and then, I think the actual one team can really sit down and do some more, this is just a starting ground, just.
And you might list then, in the comments so that we don't completely ignore it, as suggested to add different types of factoring. As a thought.
I think I did.
Recognizing the racial.
I think I said someplace I put down, perfect square triangle.
I do get you mentioned something about it.
You should talk about something like this in this.
Yeah. I know, I had it someplace. Or I did, I put perfect square triangle meals, difference of squares, different forms, and as, just kind of as a separate get started to talk about it. So, because the other thing, when you're talking about, this is about quadratics, but sometimes our kids are not really good to this point, but it's really should be done prior to this, is factoring out the greatest common factor out of term. Yes, to be able to do that, and that's not a, and sometimes we think it's an easy skill, but it's not so much.
Easiest to do, easiest to miss, is what I'm talking about.
Well, and I do think Tiffany's point is well taken, that when you're teaching a complete square, that perfect square trinomial is embedded right there front and center, and there's no way around that. And I don't know if you did have to think of it as a separate thing, obviously she knows, everyone knows, if you can't get it without seeing it, so if people are doing that and they're not doing it,
And you can't complete the square unless you can recognize the square triangle.
so I think it's okay, I think it's okay not to have, a bunch of stuff listed separately, but, but again,
Because if you list it sometimes, then they don't do anything else. Oh, we just have to do these 2 forms. But those are just thoughts. So those will be thoughts up there. And so those are there in the Algebra 1 workers. As I'm typing these notes in, I'm also going to save those with the date on it in the Algebra 1 worker folder, so we have access to that. Unless my computer types on this. Okay.
what do you think? And I've heard this too, and I'll just add, I'm trying to think who even has said this to me, and I'm not really sure I don't think anybody at my current school, but, that have said, that factoring is, sort of gone in the Common Core, and, in my view, it's always been, I don't know if it's gone or not, because I can't figure it out, what I do know, clearly, the perfect square trinomial is still in there because it's embedded completely with square. Difference of squares, of course, is implied in that example, but with the other things, the sum of difference of cubes, and things like that, it's hard figure out what method.
Well, I think there's that real difficulty now about technology, that, in how important is that compared to some other things that are important? And is factoring still an important thing to do? Yes, but when NCTM de-emphasized it years ago, they didn't say don't do it. It said de-emphasize, and so factoring is important.
Right.
But I think sometimes we spend way too much time on it, and they don't see a need or a reason to factor, and when they get into problems where they see a need or a reason to factor, then it becomes more important. When they put it in context, then it becomes much more important. You're shaking your head, Nancy, from what you guys are teaching in college, would you say, or your school, would you say that that's true?
It's one of those things that we spend years and years and years trying to get kids to do, and then once they get their college math credits, they're never gonna do it again, so it's hard for them to buy into it, because it's just a hoop to jump through. I mean, who on their job does it besides a math teacher?
That's the things when you use them, because I taught chemistry, physics, and that stuff, and nothing's gonna factor with the real world.
Right, and nothing ever does.
You just technology science years, and it's just, of course, you have to do this as well as other algebraic manipulation you do. And rational equations.
And they have to understand where things come from. Like I have several good friends whose kids are engineers, and do they factor? No, but they have to understand that when they use their technology to figure it out, so they have to understand what that means.
It's based on that. I think that understanding needs to be there.
You understand?
I guess the problem is at the college level is that you look at all this stuff, and I get people at college after they can't do so much of this stuff to begin with, but a lot of them, they just look at 24, and they don't see anything but 24, they don't see the 6 times 4.
But I think part of that goes back to just kind of, this is just my opinion, is that we try to teach so many things that they don't know anything, rather than do fewer things and be focused on knowing and understanding.
And really, you talk about, you don't see a lot of factoring of Common Core anymore, but there's such an emphasis on recognizing equivalent expressions that even though we don't necessarily call it factoring all the time, just having those, we're like, well, is this the same as this, why? And the kids will tell us, oh, because you can multiply these two together in this, and you can, this distributive property and all this other stuff, that I think they understand the numbers and how all the relationships between them a lot better than if they could just do a factor tree for 24, for example.
Because
There's a lot of that in there.
I was great at factoring. Factoring was really easy for me. You can give me any problem and I can look at it and do it. However, application, and where's the most important thing is the application. So could I factor anything? Yeah. But could I apply it? Not too much.
Well, I do think, right now in the colleges, a lot of the classes that our students of today are gonna have to take, they're not gonna be using computer algebra systems to come where they go. If they come to Rockford University in Kansas City, that's what they will do. If they go somewhere else, they might not even be allowed to use a scientific calculator. So, ultimately, I think where we're headed is we're gonna teach them math that computers can't do. But, so then, I think it does de-emphasize some of that just rote factoring, but then that's where your zero product property comes in to, at least have them put a little bit of meaning on, that revealing. So I don't know, I just put that down where you do equations and functions and not operations.
And as a non-math person, I know there's a lot of things that I never used again, but I used in high school. Isn't there something more that's gained in organizational of thought, learning to do these processes very again? I used to see them lost because the computers could do them. I guess I think there's something to be gained.
Well, and that's why I say you don't want to throw them out. You don't throw them out, but you don't spend 6 weeks on it, which some people have a tendency to do because it's an easy thing to teach and drill and practice. They need to do it, and there's no question about doing it. So taking factoring out to me is not an issue. You can leave that in there. But it should be something that we spend the 6 week unit on factoring. The application, because then part of it is the logical application that I'm going to have to find this. This is the tool that I'm going to use to be able to get this, to be able to use it. So, yeah, I agree. I don't want to throw them out, but we still have a lot of people that are teaching for 6 weeks. So, de-emphasize, and I don't think this de-emphasizes, because when it comes in here and it says complete the square and quadratic expression, that's a big step up for what has always been expected in an Algebra 1 class. Because traditionally that is there if you have time, but usually taught in Algebra 2. So that's where it's, if it's not done in Algebra 1, it's done in Algebra 2, and a lot of times in the past, quadratic, completing the square, and quadratic wasn't really done until Algebra 2.
And I think when we look at this is just how I like to do it, but you know, when you start looking at functions, that's when the factoring pieces and the, I guess, equivalent expressions piece comes to life. You know, for me, if you put it in the vertex form or the complete square form, you know, you have this, you know, stuff that you can just see as totally obvious. If you have it in a, you know, a different kind of form with the factors, then you have that. So I think that's where the factoring sort of comes to life, at least a little bit.
Yeah, you don't want to toss it out. I mean, it is important that they have the basic structure of organization, because you're talking about organizing your thoughts. Sometimes in math, that's one of the places that is a strong point, is to help you organize structures, thoughts, through process. But we do too much work with organization. We need to do more thought work. So, and I will tell you on this one that we're looking at, the reason I didn't, that when I looked at the other document, I didn't see anybody make any changes or wording on C. I'm not sure I really feel comfortable with the example that they give there. For Algebra 1, I feel very comfortable with that. For Algebra 2, and I think that's why I put it in red. I don't think that's traditionally what kids have done. There's that, would you say, Tiffany, that would be the same, that it's not something you traditionally do in Algebra 1? I think so. And use the properties of exponents and transform expressions for exponential functions. If, to me, in my opinion, if we leave that in there, I'd like to see if we put a different example. If that's what we really want there, what do we mean for an Algebra 1 level? So, any discussion on that? Okay, so example, you know, we need to rework C. I'm just gonna put rework C and come up with a different example. Is that okay?
Right.
Because I just think that, you know, maybe they'll come in from eighth grade, eventually be a little bit better prepared to handle that, but I would say that it's hard enough just for them to be able to understand monthly interest rates, annual rates, what impact that has, and how those two are equivalent. I would hope kids could put this in and realize 1.15 to 112 is the same thing as 1.02. I would hope they didn't do that, but beyond that, I wouldn't expect them probably to write that. But that's just something to think about. And again, just please, any comments?
So, can you scroll back up, one more page? Let me make sure that okay, so right there, where you have, so this is my original question to you on that expression. So, it looks like, based on that list over there, we're saying quadratic expressions. Right?
Are you talking about the bottom one here?
Well, no, not necessarily, I'm talking about the bottom one, but over to the right. So those are all quadratics. And then,
But the example.
but the example is a,
Right,
is
that's what's in
but
red.
that's still, I mean, that's a.
It's a difference of two
quadratic.
squares.
Yeah, right, so I don't know, I mean, like, for example, you definitely would not want them factoring general fourth degree equations.
No, but anything that could be represented as a difference of two squares.
Yeah.
To me might be fair game, like
Mm-hmm.
x to the 6 minus y to the 6 is a difference of two squares. So,
Right.
difference of two squares is not necessarily quadratic, difference of two squares can kill
Yeah.
quadratic. And for them to see that, oh, we can still back to this, you know,
Right.
and I think that's the important part here, is they can take x to the fourth minus y to the fourth, break that down, and say that's x squared minus y squared, x squared plus y squared. I'd even like to see them break that down one more step and say that's x plus y, x minus y.
We would expect to see that.
Yeah.
And I've given problems like that before.
Well, because then you'd see that factoring once is not necessarily finished. Okay, so maybe I'll.
Yeah, I mean, you could even, well, I don't know, make it all crazy, X to the n, X y to the n, or n is even, is that too much? Maybe it is.
I don't know, it's scared me eighth graders.
Well, but not, it wouldn't be for them, I mean, so that it's clear that we're emphasizing the fact that that's really a difference of squares, not opening the door
To
for
15.
fourth degree equations.
Right.
I think that's what, or, sorry,
I
discussions.
agree.
And then my next thing was, do we combine them somehow with, you know, some basic exponential manipulation, even though you have that
I think-
elsewhere?
And that, because it's usually properties of exponents or transform expressions for exponential functions. That's the one I think we really need to rework,
Okay,
in my opinion, just because I don't think that that's necessary. The example does, is that what we really want kids to do in algebra 1? And that is going to come into play, I think, with Tiffany's help too, from what is with exponentials, you know, with understanding rules of exponents, and what do we want them to be able to do in algebra 1? To be able, Julie, when they get to an algebra 2, what do they need to know when they get algebra 2 that can even build off of for
right.
them to be successful? So I think that's where having that discussion between eighth grade expectations, algebra 2 expectations, what do they need to really do coming out of ninth grade or algebra 1, so that they're successful in algebra 2, or have a foundational building blocks that they need to be working on.
So are we asking, so then on the, right, that page where you are now, your C part, the part you just turned into red up there, or maybe this year too, and it just didn't go that way. That maybe goes into algebra 2, or,
This example might go in algebra 2.
Yeah.
But we need to really go back and work with it, with the algebra 1 class, so that's why that example was red. I wasn't sure that was the example we wanted to have. Properties to transform exponential functions, properties of exponents, that might be okay. Like, it wouldn't bother me to leave 1.15 to 112 to the 12t is equal to 1 point, you know, to know that they can manipulate those exponents, that 1 over 12, 1.15 to the 112 to the 12t, what is that? Simplify to write it in a different format.
yeah, I mean, they definitely do need to be able to manipulate exponents. Yeah, so that's,
So that would be a place where I think I would come up with it. that we
a
might
better
have
way
to
to do it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what this one is suggesting, if it's suggesting that you teach them all the interest applications, or if it's just suggesting that they need to get that exponent, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and to me, when I look at this, it just looks like it's the property of exponents, you know, that I understand that it does.
And I'm thinking, because I'm looking at it from an algebra 2 standpoint, and we do the, you know,
Commonality.
A equals PRT and 1 plus R and all that stuff, you know, I know we used to call it that.
It does need some, a little more clarification, because, you know,
Yeah.
you go from just rational exponents and then.
Yeah, and I just, that would make it clear what our focus is there. So.
And I think that's where algebra 1 and eighth grade teachers, we can sit down and work, put that together, and let algebra 2 look at it and say, hey, you know, this is what we need, you know, is there a way we could write this and be clear? So, yeah, absolutely. And when I looked across the different states, they pretty much have the same standard for the next one, but they use integer inputs only and for exponential functions, and I would say that's probably appropriate for algebra 1. Because the way it was written before wouldn't matter for algebra 2, but it might for algebra 1. But again, these are, I know it's 11:30. Do we want to adjourn and go lunch? Do we want to stop here, say that we're lunch, and then come back?
I guess my only comment is I like the drink, it's okay, yeah, it's
So looking at this page, and again, there's gonna be a lot of work done on this still, quite a bit of work. We can stop here at this page, is there anything else on this page that we want to do?
I'm sorry, Tiffany, can you say that again? about-
I said I liked that it was integer if it's only for,
Algebra.
For the exponential function.
and like
Because
the
people can get
verification
really
there.
crazy, people can get really crazy for those.
Well, I agree too, although I find myself looking at what some people have put together and thinking, is it a continuous function or is it not? But it's neat to see them put integer inputs on there and then connect them, because if that's all your inputs, then you really shouldn't do that, but. So,
We can have that discussion.
but I agree that we should limit exponential functions, I'm 100% behind that.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe that, what am I voting for here, is a little more clarification to help people. So if like you're looking at, like the famous, tiny growth problems and stuff like that, that's clearly an exponential progression. But not a continuous.
So are we at a point where we think we could break for lunch? You want to grab that? So should we adjourn then? I don't think we need to make this official to adjourn, but let's say get back here if we can between around 12:15, 12:30, 20. Okay, and then we'll kind of get started. Okay, guess have a good lunch.